it. Maria. Maria just showed up, so that's perfect time. Hey,
I see you, Eric, now.
Okay.
By the way, I saw a hat you were wearing. That's the same hat I have in a picture of yours.
Okay. What kind of hat is that?
It's got like a brown two-tone color on top.
Oh yeah. I know what
I
you're
have the
talking.
same hat.
Yeah, I wear it to my little cigar group and stuff like that. Just
Yeah,
certain.
that's where I
Yeah.
saw that picture.
get some water. Be right back. Hey, Maria. Glad you're able to join us.
All right, Yehudah, your camera is off now.
Yeah, I just need to get some water. Sorry. Okay. We're here. We did our greetings. So just explain that a little bit. So in Igbo land, they oftentimes, if you want to speak in the community setting, you stand up and you say Igbo Kwenu. And Igbo Kwenu means Igbo hail. And the response is Ya. And you say it 3 times. And the idea is that you're basically requesting permission and almost like consent from everybody else in the community that you can speak, right? And so I'm adapting it with shalom, not ibokwenu, but with shalom and yeah. And so I'm not sure if anyone's actually really clear about the origin of the practice, but one of the explanation I was given is that it's saying Igbo hail, and the response is Yah, what are you hailing? Yah being the most high, right? The creator. So I just wanted to bring that in as a beginning and as a way to get permission from everybody here to be able to speak and share. So as you all know, our family's been practicing Torah spirituality for many years, essentially my whole life in the form of Judaism. And because the Torah got a Fulbright to Nigeria, and because, then Iman Abba, they got a chance to go visit her. They built some connections with Igbo people there. And then I recently then had the opportunity to build off of their connections, the fact that Keturah's was living in Lagos for about a little over a year. I got an opportunity in January to go to Lagos and then go to Igbo land, which I'll share more about that, but it's a little further, it's far out. It's in the eastern part of Nigeria, and so it's not easily accessible. And there's a lot of state policies that say dangerous, don't go there, right? But I was able to make it out there and deepen my understanding of our ancestral roots, our very, very likely Igbo heritage, which I'll get to in a few moments. 7 years ago, I was in Israel on a program trip, and the trip, we're standing on the port looking out at the water, and the trip organizer said to me, and actually, I'm going to share a little presentation. The 7 years ago, I was on this trip, and the trip organizer said to me, where does history begin for you? And that really struck a chord for me because I couldn't answer that question fully, given the historical, cultural, and spiritual erasure that the transatlantic slave trade has done to most of us who are descendants of enslaved peoples, right? And so on Ima's side, we had already had some kind of oral history and knowledge that, from my mom's side of the family, that we are descendants of Igbo people, which we now know to be ancestrally Jewish as well. But we've been so disconnected for generations and, not having any real connections to Igbo people or to the customs and traditions. it just in that moment when I was asked that question, I couldn't actually answer it fully, which set me off to do a 23andMe, if y'all remember. And then even I know Ava also did a 23andMe, and then a lot of other people started doing the 23andMe. That's kind of started off a whole storm of stuff. In any event, I think having the opportunity to go to Igbo land, experience the customs traditions has really filled in a missing link in the chain of history, and has given me a sense of empowerment and groundedness in my own future, given that I can fill in a little bit more about where we come from as a family and as a people. So, I shared this with, I'm trying to share this as much as I can with different communities, of course, our family, and I'm going to continue sharing it for a few reasons. Number one, coming back when I was in Igbo land, they asked me to actually go and share this information with other people and to be an ambassador of sort. But I'm not here, and I'm sharing this with various communities, and of course here with this family, I'm not here to convince anybody or say that anybody should be Jewish or not Jewish or whatever, but it's really just an opportunity to, I think, open up discussion as a family to kind of deepen our understanding of our potential ancestral connection at the very least, and to facilitate connections with anybody who wants it and wants to explore more and build community with our potential extended Igbo family. So really just here to share and discuss. I don't want this to be purely frontal. At any moment that you have other information that you know about or experiences that you want to add in, particularly when we get to the part about our family history and lineage. I'm looking at you, Aunt Cindy. Really, please do jump in. And at any point, if anything's unclear, please come off mute, ask questions. Let this be a discussion. And I'm here to learn just as much as I am to share. So where I want to start with is taking a step back, right? And before getting to our very, very likely Igbo ancestry on the kind of Webster school side of the story, right? I know that we have an oral history on my mom's side, but I think there's really strong evidence as well that it's present on our side of the family as well, right? Before I get there, I do want to just give a little bit of background as to the very strong likelihood, regardless of the DNA that we have, that we have some Igbo ancestor in the mix somewhere, right? So you're looking at the triangle slave trade, right, of what was going on, and captured Africans being enslaved and brought to the Caribbean and to the US, right? And so there's scholarship that says that 15% of all enslaved Africans came from the area of Nigeria. There are two main coastal areas that many of these enslaved folks came from. The Bight of Benin, which was about 1.5 million enslaved peoples. And we know these numbers are low, probably, right? But this is like the official accepted scholarship. You got 1.5 million from the Bight of Benin, and then another at least 1.3 million from the Bight of Biafra. And so you're talking about nearly 3 million people, and most of those, I'd say about over a million at the very least came to the US, many being brought to Virginia. You had, and then another, nearly a million brought to the Caribbean, right? I actually just want to drop in the chat for folks who are interested. I have been using a website I found here that has a lot of the slave ship records. And so you can take a look for yourself and see, kind of work with their different filters and databases and kind of track from where people were captured or enslaved or sold and where they were brought and embarked and how many folks survived. And it's quite detailed and amazing kind of resource that we have now, that they've compiled. And it's, I mean, obviously a horrific history of our family and of our people. So at the very least, you'll see it later on in the slide, but in the slides, but at the very least, you have this person, the scholar Douglas B. Chambers. He estimates that of the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade in the US, that at least 60% have at least one parent that's of Igbo ancestry. So just alone, without even our DNA confirmation, there's a very strong likelihood, just based off of the numbers, that we have Igbo ancestry somewhere in the mix, right? And, some scholarships say that his estimation is high. And so, the lowest scholarship that I found is saying that at least 25% of people have at least one parent that's of Igbo ancestry. So, you have a range, 25 to 60%. That's kind of what I found in my research. Just to locate us a little bit in taking a step back around, well, where do Igbo people come from? And then I'll come back to our family and just give a little bit of information about just locating Nigeria. Where is that? How did Igbo people get to Nigeria, right? Or what are some of the accounts of how people got there? And what is their connection to Israelite, ancient Israelites that historically and biblically in the before the Common Era. So you'll see here my cursor, this first star over here, this is Lagos, which is like the New York City of Nigeria, and that's where Katora was, right? It's like really bustling metropolitan. Up here, around here is Abuja, that's the capital, yeah. And over here is where I visited. This is one of the states in Igbo land. It's called Anambra and Ogidi. It's a 10-hour car ride and a 1-hour domestic flight, right? And so I'd say this kind of whole area is considered Igbo land. And it's a pretty, Nigeria is a huge country. So it looks kind of small on the map, but it's a vast area making up many different states. That is Igbo land, yeah. And so, and then you'll see here on the right, a map of the Nile River. This is Israel, this is Egypt, and the Nile River, right? And so you have different kind of origin stories that you'll hear, right? And this is not, some of this is contested, what I'm going to share with you. There's not consensus exactly on how Igbo people end up in Nigeria, right? But you'll find that the Igbos who connect their lineage to the Israelites, many of them will say that at the very least, they can all agree, that population of people can all agree that starting since the time of King Solomon, in about 1000 before the Common Era, right? That and through the destruction of the various temples, second and first, and as the Israelite nation really began to crumble, that there was chaos. The Israelites are in exile, people are fleeing, people are being taken into slavery in different places, right? By the Babylonians, by the Assyrians. And so you had a population of Israelites who fled into Egypt. And you actually even have documentation biblically that you had some Israelites settle in Elephantine and create a Jewish community in the southernmost area of Egypt, right, where my cursor is. And just seeing some stuff is in the chat. What's going on here? On Cindy asks, are there multiple tribes within Igbo, multiple languages? There are multiple, there are many subgroups. It's a really good question. There are many subgroups of the Igbo. And around the language piece, I don't think so. I think there's like basically there's the one language, but I'm not 100% sure. Victoria, I don't know if you know the answer to that question, but my sense is that it's really one language, and that in many ways, Igbo is more pointing to the language than it is to like a coalesced group of people, right? It's a really good question. So you had this group of Israelites who kind of create this Jewish community in South Egypt, and then from there continue to follow the Nile and migrate, and some split off following the Blue Nile into Ethiopia, right? And so you can see, here. And so you can see, right, like, and we know this, right? We know this from just historical fact that you have a large group of African Jews in Ethiopia that were isolated for thousands of years. And until you had the European Jews go in and kind of rescue some of them who were under persecution in the 70s and 90s, that, they didn't even know that European Jews existed, right? Because they were so isolated off, right? So you had people go down the Blue Nile, and then you had some others continue to follow the White Nile into the Great Lakes region of Africa and beyond. And so you have some, I know that keeps happening. You have some scholarship that's been saying that from there, either folks from Ethiopia or folks later on kind of migrated west and ended up in what is now Nigeria. Now, I think you ask people in Igbo land, what Israelite tribe are you from? Do you know what tribe you're from? And some people will say, I'm not sure. Some people will say they know, I think what is certainly true is that there are some leading tribes that are descendants of the seventh son of Jacob. So, Jacob had 12 sons. His seventh son was Gad in English. In Hebrew, it's pronounced God, right? And so God then had 6 sons himself. And his 5th son was Eri, and his 6th son was Arodi. Now, there's this professor, Dr. Charles Ndogu. I got to meet with him, and he gave me a lecture for about a good hour, 2 hours. And so he was teaching that, the Aro people, Aro in Hebrew means wanderer, interestingly enough. And so he was saying that they were really great wanderers, right? That they migrated from place to place to place. And so his kind of hypothesis is that perhaps they settled in Ethiopia for some time and then continued on wandering and migrating and wandering and migrating until they ended up in Nigeria. And they settled in what is now Orochukwu. And I would estimate it's kind of over here where my cursor is. And Orochukwu means in Igbo language, servant of, Chukwu is their word for the creator. And so servant of the creator, right? And they organized themselves into a pretty powerful republic with a priesthood and everything. And they were they had a pretty powerful army such that they resisted British colonial rule up until the early 20th century. I think they were defeated in 1901 or 1902. And but they gave them a run for their money, all of this to say, and they had a pretty good established kingdom, right? And so you had these different kind of Igbo to your point on Cindy, you had different Igbo subgroups who had various power, right, and leadership in the vastness of what is now southeastern Nigeria. And so Aro was one of them, and they called themselves Aro people because they connect that their ancestor was the sixth son of God, right? The sixth son, Rod. Now, on the other end, we'll see here, the fifth son of God was Eri. And so you'll find like if you look at the map, you like pull up a map right now of Nigeria and kind of zoom in on Google, you'll find all these different towns. And some of them are Arochukwu, right? Or Aguleri, right? And so you'll find the name Eri and Aro embedded into the names of many of these towns because they are giving credence to their progenitor ancestor, right? That this was their kind of founding ancestor that they linked their lineage to. Now, this particular sub-clan, Eri, they can trace their oldest ancestor that settled in Igbo land all the way back. You'll see here at the bottom, this bottom chart is a lineage chart. They can trace their oldest ancestor all the way back to 1087 before the Common Era, BC, right? And so they have a king. I mean, this is the modern day throne right here. I met with this person, and he is the 34th king, and he sits on the throne. I had to learn how to say "Long live the king" in Igbo, and do the whole thing. And so right here is the kind of relic palace that the initial person would have lived in. And this is the statue of Eri that they recreated, right? So this is kind of like a museum now. And then adjacent to it is the current kind of palace, if you will, right? And so it's pretty amazing that they can trace their lineage going all the way back. And so he's not Jewish himself, he's Christian, but he holds that he is a descendant of the tribe of God, the fifth son of Eri. You'll even find that all of this information is somewhat corroborated even in Jewish texts. In the Mishnah, which is the compilation of oral law that's published around 200 Common Era, the rabbis have this whole kind of conversation, and they ask each other, well, where did Sennacherib, who was the Syrian king at the time, where did he exile the 10 tribes? And then another rabbi says, well, he exiled them to Africa. And another rabbi says they exiled them to the Selag Mountains, which is in Ethiopia. So you definitely have European Jews who, from early on, knew and understood that many of the exiled Israelites went into Africa. That much is clear, right? They're not even debating that. And there are records of European Jews in your 15th century visiting Nigeria, Portuguese, Moroccan Jews trading in the region of Igbo land. And you have even some records of letters from the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Lithuania, even Suriname, right, which is next to Guyana, which had a big kind of, Portuguese Jewish presence, sending letters addressed to the Igbos. And all of their correspondences address the Igbos as brethren of the children of Israel, right? So it's further affirmation, not that we're looking to the Europeans for confirmation, but these correspondences help us to know that it was known and that this is a historical reality. You'll see also that I'll come to this in a second. What people have for generations been living out Torah-based spirituality, and I can go into some of those customs. I'm going to go into some of those customs a little bit later, but everything from agricultural spiritual practices of not reaping the harvest to the corner of the field, to letting the land rest every 7 years, to keeping a form of Shabbat, of a day of rest. And, along with that, in the Torah, you'll find laws around how do you have kind of indentured servants, somewhat a slavery, if you will, right? Nothing like the chattel slavery that we experienced in the transatlantic slave trade, that is, right? It was much more like indentured servitude. There was a lot of laws regulating the fair treatment of these slaves and all of this. Now, I raise all of this to say that you had Igbo people, because of this practice of slavery based off of the culture of the Torah, who were very willing to participate in the transatlantic slave trade. They were very willing to reap the economic benefits of trading with the Europeans, because in their mind, they didn't imagine that the slavery would have been as brutal as the chattel slavery that the Europeans did, right? And so they stepped into that somewhat willingly. And so you had, you'll see here some of the stats, when we went to Badagry, which is one of the slave ports in Nigeria, they say that 6 out of the 10 enslaved Africans of all of the transatlantic slave trade left from that port. Many of those would have been Igbo. Of course, you've got, hundreds of tribes in and around that area. So some of them would have been Yoruba, some of them would have been, other tribes in that area, but many would have been Igbo. And so, you have at least 1.5, again, to 3 million Igbos who were enslaved. Yeah. Now, what you're seeing here is there was, it's kind of said that the Igbos were very rebellious, that they fought back a lot, that there was a high rate of suicide, which for every person who jumps over the ship and drowns themselves, that's like, money lost for the slavers, right? So they became very concerned with how do we make these, hey, Amaria, how do we make these enslaved people docile? So they went to the Yoruba tribe, the Yoruba tribe really controlled the port of Badagry. And they asked them, well, do you know, the Europeans asked the Yoruba people, do you know how to make them docile? And the Yoruba came up with this kind of tribal magic, and it's called the well to forget. So enslaved peoples would be captured out in the eastern part of the country, or all over kind of the continent, right? They'd be brought to Badagry. They're kept there for about 2 to 3 months on the auction block before they then march this final march 1 mile. It's called to the ocean. It's called the point of no return. And so they're wearing the heavy chains. I did actually put that on. It was very, very heavy. Can't even imagine. They had like the replica, or not the replica. They had one of them in that you could actually, put on. It was insane. And they walked this last mile, and halfway through, what they did was they made the people drink from this well. Now, people were deprived of water. So by the time you get to a well, you're eager to drink from it, right? And then afterwards, they tell them, "Oh, this water has been, magicked on, and you're gonna forget who you are." But was the magic real? Who knows, right? But at the very least, the placebo effect, the psychological impact of what that would do to people, I think, created the outcomes that the Europeans wanted, which were much more cooperative enslaved Africans, which could have been. I mean, it was very solemn to walk that walk. I imagine that maybe one of our ancestors walked that very same point of no return. Before I come back to our family, I want to just note that, and like where our family kind of comes into this, interestingly enough, while Igbos were being enslaved and forced to convert to Christianity, some, in the transatlantic slave trade, you had starting in the 1850s, right? British at this time has already moved away from slavery. They're fighting against slavers at this point. But they're also here for colonialism. And so they're trying to impose their colonial rule on Nigeria, right? And so they basically, and this is what I was talking about before with, Arochukwu being one of the last holdouts in the early 20th century. So they basically conquered that whole area. Just go back a couple of slides. This whole area, which is now Nigeria, they called it Nigeria because it's the area of the Niger, right? So that was their brilliant idea of what to call the country. And they had this under their colonial rule. And so they send their missionaries as well. And those missionaries are also pushing the conversion to Christianity on Igbo people. So so it's just interesting, a parallel that you had also during colonial, like if you weren't enslaved, you still had an imposition on you through the colonial rule. And so the elders that I met with, they called this trading chattel slavery for mental slavery, right? Because they're trying to somewhat create an imposition of control on the populace such that there wouldn't be resistance. Interestingly enough, during this colonial period, you had, this Freedom Park is a park kind of dedicated to political prisoners who were fighting against the colonial rule. And so you had this Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was studying in the US, came back to Nigeria in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and he writes an article and publishes that in the 40s, claiming that the culture of the Hebrews in the Torah reflect the culture of Igbo people in Aguleri. Again, that's another town. And again, if you're hearing Eri, right? Agul-Eri, right? Eri being that fifth son of the tribe of, the fifth son of God, right? Of that tribe. So it's a lot of that's embedded, right? So you're already having by the 1940s some early accounts of Igbo people, even though they were going through forced conversion, kind of, they didn't, Igbo people who were connected to the Israelite lineage, they didn't necessarily call it Judaism. But they start to get, by being in the US, getting exposed to the Bible and to other religions. And so they start putting together like, oh man, the practices of my ancestors, of my grandparents, are the very same things in this book, right? And so there was a lot of focus on the New Testament, but over time, as people start reading the Old Testament, they're like, this is the exact same thing that our forefathers have been doing the whole time, our traditional Igbo religion, our cultural religion, if you will. Okay, so you've got 34 million people, Igbo people today in Nigeria, up to 50 million.
I inject one point.
Oh, please.
Yeah, just one thought there to elaborate on what you're saying. The word Jewish and even the word Judaism are more modern words, because the Hebrew terms for those are not that. And so clearly, like, they would have never thought of themselves as Jewish, because that word that's not even a Hebrew word. It's totally foreign to even if you were speaking Hebrew. And of course, by this time, they had lost Hebrew as their language. So by this time, they're only speaking Igbo, which is not Hebrew. It's a different language. So of course, they wouldn't have thought of themselves as Jewish. So it's a very powerful point that you're making, that they don't know of this term, but suddenly when they hear it in the States, the people are, oh, you're saying that's what Judaism is? Well, we've been doing that all along.
Exactly. Thanks for making that point clearer. So 34 million people who are Igbo today in Nigeria, up to 50 million in the diaspora, including those, and that's not even including those who don't even know that they're Igbo, right? There's a lot of us potentially out here. So how does this all connect to our family? So thanks to Aunt Cindy's extensive research on the family, I was able to pull up this family tree, right? And so we see very fascinating, right? Our ancestor Stevens, right? And I know that there's Aunt Cindy, please jump in here, that you found research to say that she was born in North Carolina.
I think it was Alabama.
Or Alabama.
Yeah,
Excuse-
Gordon, hold on. I can hardly see it.
Yeah, it's trying to get
Okay,
you
yeah,
here. It's quite small.
right.
What if I could zoom in?
I think it was Alabama. If you click on, I think I put information on her profile.
Okay, I grabbed the screenshot, so
Okay,
I can't pull that up on the screen.
right.
But the interesting piece here, right, that I just want to point out, and you can see, is that when we looked at our 23andMe, right, I did one and I did one, right, and I think a lot of y'all did one too, right? Everybody here did 23andMe. So it'd be interesting. You could go look for yourself, right? If you go to your ancestry report and then look at your ancestry timeline, you'll see this, right? That it's going to say something different for you, right? Because you're closer. But for me, it's that I most likely had a third great grandparent, fourth great grandparent, or sixth great grandparent who was 100% Nigerian. This person was likely born between 1840 and 1900, right? And so the estimated date of birth for the furthest back we can trace is 1835. They're pretty close, right? The 23andMe estimation. And of course, 23andMe is, there's a margin of error for them as well. But at the very least, there is, we know for sure that we have, and so I have this. So if I look at Abba's, he has that, right? It's not third great grandparent, but grandparent, great grandparent, I think his says. And then also on my mom's side, she also has that, right? So, and different kind of story. They're in the Caribbean, but it's different, but certainly related, right? So this is, this is how, I mean, yes, there is room to say ultimately that it's possible that this ancestor wasn't Igbo, but
Sorry for cutting you off. I just looked it up. You're right. North Carolina. It says she was born,
okay.
but she ended up in Alabama when she had her grandfather. That's what I meant.
Okay, thank you. Right, so, could have been her, it could have been her parent that was brought over here as an enslaved person, right, from Igbo land.
And do you mind if I interject? And Cindy, I don't know why I have a different memory of what Dad told me about Lear Stevens, but for some reason I remember Dad telling me that he met her,
right,
and that when he met her, she was very, very old.
right.
He said she came from Africa as a slave.
Right.
And thinking about the contradiction between a record saying she was born here versus Dad's oral history that she was actually brought here as a slave. I'm just thinking about the fact that there were a lot of records being created for slaves to hide the fact that they were being brought over at a time where the British had outlawed, right? There were people trying to stop them from bringing slaves from Africa, but they were secretly bringing them in. And so they could have just lied about where she was born because they brought her over here during a time when she wasn't supposed to be being brought over here. So that's all possible. I can't say that that's what happened, but the memory I have, and unfortunately, when Dad would have told me these things, I didn't write it down because, I didn't even have the same understanding of the importance of this
at
the time that, Dad was living, unfortunately. But I'm glad that we're waking up to really seek this out now. You know?
But I remember what, like you said it, but I think it was more, I think I thought more like she was brought to North Carolina, not that she was born there.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking because of what you said. And then somehow she ended up in Deep South, Alabama, where,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just reading different books, well, I guess the slaves that were already here, nobody wanted to end up in Deep South, but our lineage goes straight down to Alabama,
Mm.
you know, and Florida and Mississippi area where it was really, you know, it was Caribbean hard.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That's deep. That's deep.
Yeah, curious if there's any other thoughts or anything else that y'all, you know, Uncle Eric, Uncle Leroy, Aunt Maria, that y'all want to add in on Carla about what you heard or learned growing up about Lear Stevens or connections.
I know Dad said she lived in like some old cabin, like in the woods somewhere, and she was really old when he met her, and he just remembered like what you just said, Wes, about her being a slave from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
But I literally found her name in the census, which was amazing. It's just that it's still really weird because she was really old on there. Matter of fact, I have a picture of it.
Hmm.
It was when Grandpa was 4 years old in
Mhm.
1906.
Yeah.
And she, at that time, was 75 years old in 1906.
Robert, do you want to make On City a co-host? Do you want to share your
Yeah,
screen?
yeah. Let me make you a
Oh,
co-host,
how
Cindy.
do I do that?
I'm making you a co-host now. You'll see something that tells you you're a co-host, and then you can just share your screen.
I don't. You did it already?
Yeah, I made you a co-host.
Oh,
And then at the bottom, you should see something that says share.
oh, I see it. Okay, share screen. I'm just gonna say desktop. Share. Am I sharing?
I don't see it yet.
I don't see it yet.
When you hit that share button, something should pop up,
Mhm.
and it should say desktop, and then you just click the share button again at the bottom of that little pop-up screen.
And then I click share again. Then it says open share system preferences. Do I have to do that?
Yeah, you might have to open your preferences to allow it.
Do you want to email me?
I'll email it to you. Yeah, that sounds better. Matt, I'm gonna text it to you.
Okay. Problem.
Do that.
And I can share my screen.
My technical challenges and whatnot.
And Zoom has got 1,000 controls. It's not easy.
Right. All right, so let me just grab a snapshot of this.
While that's happening, I don't know if I'm
I like your background, Maria. How you do that? You high tech.
That's Pasadena. That's actually a shot when I was in Pasadena.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Or actually, La Jolla. I took an Uber to La Jolla and was getting around on a scooter.
Okay.
That's La Jolla.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful picture.
Thank you.
But I remember the same story that y'all just said about Dad telling us about the great grandma. It was a great grandmother. He said was
Right.
a slave, was an African slave from Africa. That's the only story I remember being told.
I don't remember the slave part. I just remember he liked saying how dark she was. She was very black.
Yeah.
And she was in the it's funny, she was in the middle in my head, in the middle of it translated in my brain as like the plantation or a field. I didn't have a thought that it could have been forest.
Yep,
But I
in the
think it was
woods.
just how I was envisioning him talking. Just a little hut, a shack,
Yep.
sitting in the middle of nowhere.
In the woods.
In my mind was like a cotton field or something. And I think because I was young, I didn't have a better way to put a vision in my head as
Because
he
even
shared that.
grandpa's family didn't have indoor plumbing all up into the 70s. You know what I mean? Donnie Mae and you know, grandpa's siblings.
Right.
Well, even the ones that came up for Coleman's funeral were living, the best I could tell, decades in the past.
Mhm.
Like kind of still living with people and the kind of ways, relationships they had with working for people was not, it didn't sound modern to me. I'll put it like that. If you recall, Cindy.
And look how they got grandpa's race mulatto, because Lear Stevens, or let's see, because his, oh God. no,
His
it's-
father was half and half, right?
Or right, or the mother was white, his mother
Or-
was white. That
Our
was
German,
our
isn't this the whole thing with the German and whatever?
Well, that was Lear Stevens and the German Jew named Bruner.
But he wasn't actually Jewish, right?
Von Brunner.
Well, a German, you know.
Yeah, because we found out there is no Ashkenazi ancestry there.
Right, I think you found that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the 23andMe didn't have it.
Yeah.
No.
But it's interesting, yeah. So because we're looking at, this is our grandfather's birth certificate, what we're looking at, right?
The
Or birth
census.
record.
So, right, so if you look at it, if you,
So she was born into slavery, Lear. What's her birth year?
1935, but is what they're saying.
1835, if you
Yeah,
count.
1835,
So
yeah.
yeah, so she
Back.
was born into slavery. So she was
We're saying she
essentially,
came here as a slave, but they created a record saying she was born in North Carolina.
It was something, well, I don't know if it said
Well,
she
we
was
don't
born
know.
there.
We're not, but because Dad is telling us, or our oral history says she came as a slave.
Right,
She came here enslaved, like she came straight from Africa. That's the oral record we have from Dad. We do know also that during that time period, they created a lot of records saying people were born here when they really weren't, because slavery was being outlawed. You weren't supposed to be transporting people across the Atlantic. If you had them as children here, then it was legal, but you weren't allowed to bring them from Africa anymore. And so a lot of records were being, forged.
so you see, this is, grandpa was age 4 in 1910.
Mhm.
And then grandpa was a junior, because this is his father, Sidney Webster, that's listed down where it says household members.
Right.
And Aunt Ann said that he was considered a wealthy man, and she said that she picked the name Webster, is what Aunt May said, or I think Aunt May told me, because she didn't want her children named after their owner. Something like that.
Well, look at this. It says she was 75 in 1906,
Right,
which makes more sense as to why Dad could have met her,
right.
right?
right, because she was
Because
still
but
around. She was in
that
her
doesn't
90s.
match. But that won't match 1835, will it?
Does it? 75 from
I
1835.
don't know. I'm wondering now. Anyway, I'll do the math.
Because he was born in
Yeah,
33.
Yeah, it does. It does.
It does?
1835, it didn't count, 45, 55, 65, 75, 85, 95, then 1905, she would have been 70. 1905, she would have been 70. That's issue, that's.
No, yeah, it's
But he
off
was
a few
born in
years, right? It's
37,
off a few
At
years.
33. So how old did he have to be to remember meeting her? And then you got to do that math.
Right,
And that would
Right,
make
exactly.
her over
So-
100.
So probably, yeah. So it's off a few years already here. And what I'm trying to say is it probably does point to the idea that so-called birth record that is found is just probably something somebody made up to justify why they were enslaving her at the time they were enslaving her. Because I also remember Dad said that she came here as a slave when she was 12 years old.
now that I don't
I
remember,
don't-
it's possible.
I don't have any of that.
I mean, it's possible, I just don't remember it.
All right. Well, anyway, it's good to keep all of this oral history,
Yeah, I
in
like the
circulation,
record.
because generations to come, like Yehudah's kids, they'll be asking these questions, and Couture's kids, and you
Yep.
guys' kids, and so forth. So the next generation down, they're gonna be talking about it for sure.
I try to record all of it, even
Yeah.
what you say, what we all say, because at some point we might be able to make sense of it, or like you
Yeah.
said, your kids and generations behind us might be able to tie it all together some kind of way.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, Yehudah, you going ahead? You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I have some technical difficulties myself. Couldn't get off mute. Okay. Um, really, really interesting. Thank you all for that. That was really good, some good learning for me. So I just wanna bring us through just a couple of the scenes and the sites of Igbo land of the East, so you get a sense of what we're looking at. It's interesting. I put these pictures side by side. Some of these pictures are of Guyana, and some of these pictures are from Igbo land. And you have which is interesting to see, like they look really similar. And so I was amazed when I got off the plane and got picked up, and we're driving in, so we're in the state of Anambra, and we stayed within that state, the town of Ogidi, right? Which has 9 villages and is in the county of Ndemili. And so we were in the village of Nkwela, right? And it just amazed me how much it looked like Guyana, or rather Guyana looked just like it, right? And it makes sense because people would have recreated the culture, right? For those who made it to Guyana, you can remember, right? Like kind of looks like it, right? And so the people that were enslaved, right? Because the Caribbean, at the very least, was really a majority enslaved peoples, right? It was different for the US. The US was majority white folks, so they couldn't really recreate what they knew, right? But in the Caribbean, they were able to do that. So that's just an interesting piece there. So we stayed about 5-minute drive at a hotel from the synagogue, from the community. This compound is where kind of where the synagogue is, and also where folks lived. And the community really welcomed us. It was beautiful, and people looked at my features and immediately were like, he's Igbo, which was amazing to from the airport. I kid you not, from the moment I landed in Lagos, people were asking me, "Oh, you're Igbo." And meanwhile, there are 250 tribes in Nigeria, so it was pretty amazing that people were already kind of reading me as an Igbo person. We did, I did services with them, and when I wasn't doing services, I was getting lectures from the different elders, professors. I did end up meeting with the king of the tribe of God, again, of Eri. What am I trying to say here? I've got 8 hours of interviews recorded, and I'm still making my way through all the information because it's an overwhelming amount, right? Conversation spanned a lot from people's individual and familial spiritual journeys. Again, you had a lot of people who converted to Christianity through colonialism, and some people, because there was I wasn't really familiar with this. I didn't learn this history so much, but there was a genocide of Igbo people in the late 60s, early 70s. After colonialism ended in the early 60s, again, the British forced 250 tribes to be nation, when before that they weren't one nation. They were their own sovereign peoples, right? And so Igbo people wanted to go back to being their own nation. Like, we don't want to be part of this thing, Nigeria. So they tried to break off and create Biafra. And the the war started, which then turned into a genocide, and 3 million, estimated 3 million Igbo people were killed through like a man-made famine, and and so you had, because of all of that happening, many people kind of disconnected from their ancestral roots. But in the last 30, 40 years, there's been somewhat of an awakening, if you will, a return. People who were really rooted in Christianity, really all about it. A lot of folks were illiterate. They only created a written Igbo language so that they could translate the Bible into Igbo, so that that could help with the missionaries that were happening. But you had people who now became literate, who were really devout Christians, going back and reading the Old Testament, which, they weren't really focusing on, because Christianity focuses on the New Testament, and reading through the Old Testament, realizing, man, like, this is what my grandparents have been doing. This is their traditional culture, right? And so you have people, kind of youth and older people, returning to what is called Omenana, their traditional Igbo religion. And Omenana means things do in the land. Which is a really interesting piece, right? That it translates to things that you do in the land, because that's very much the practice of the Torah, that it's things that you do in the land. It's a very land-based, agricultural-based spiritual practice that, you read the Torah, the Old Testament, during the period of the Exodus from Egypt to Israel, they weren't doing a lot of the practices because they weren't yet in the land. And once they were in the land, they were expected to do it. So they kind of carried that on with them, things that you do in the land. So as I said, I got a lot of lectures from about Igbo customs, histories, practices that really align in various ways to Torah spiritual practice. And I met with Eze Chukwumeka Eri, who's the 34th king of the tribe of God, right? So these are some of the community members that I met with. This right here is Dr. Charles Ndogu, right? He had a lot to say. This is the, interestingly enough, it's, as like a lot of religious practices are, like the men are at the, as you'll find in rabbinical Judaism as well, I'll say it like this: the men are kind of at the front, but this community is very matriarchal. There's like this person's wife, she's the matriarch of the community. She has the final word, everything, like gatherings, whatever it was. Like the men would speak, la la la, and then she gets up and she has the final word. She really.
That's Yitzhak's mother?
That's Yitzhak's mother, yeah.
Yes, yes.
I'm just in the chat now. I don't know, Maria, if you want to speak to what you're speaking to, Elnardo Webster. Not.
No, it's a sidebar. It's a side note. It's just when Cindy showed the great uncles, I don't recognize those names regularly. So it was just a coincidence that there's a L Webster in our lineage, and there's an L Nardo Webster, in the area where we all grew up.
Yep.
And he looked like Peter. I'm
Yep.
just saying.
We've tried to figure that out, but we haven't found a connection yet.
Yeah, very possible.
It's just a sidebar, sorry.
No, it's a good sidebar, no need to put it at all. I wonder too, like if 23andMe can make those connections, and if like, because there's a lot of, it's crazy, it's kind of wild what 23andMe does.
It's all I hesitate to heavily rely on 23andMe because its accuracy is limited, and I know you did mention that. It can only go so far, and even with how far it can go, there are it just can't be precise enough at the level that they do that work.
True. And there's some other DNA tests that I'm curious to do that are much more precise, at
Oh,
least
absolutely.
for
And
African.
you have to pay a lot of money, but you can do true genetic testing.
Yeah. Particularly around African tribes. So it'd be interesting to kind of drill in and see for sure, do we have Igbo lineage on the Webster Sewell side or what? We know for sure. We could say for sure that it's Nigerian, but is it Igbo? There are a lot of tribes. But there's a lot of things, a lot of evidence that's kind of leading us to that conclusion.
When you say there's a king, so the what does it go through like their lineage type thing? So his sons, is it like the British structure of
Yeah.
being elevated to?
Yeah, so this guy right here, he's the current king. His name is Eze Chukwumeka Eri.
Mm,
He was coronated in the I want to say 70s. And you see him as a black and white photo as a young man, maybe like 15, honestly. And so you can see at the bottom here, right? The lineage going back
I see.
there, right? And so he can trace it all the way back, right? And so that's a pretty powerful kind of empirical evidence that they have that connects them back to the Israelites, right? Again, he's not practicing Judaism. He himself is Christian. But you'll see here the kind of ancient palace. But what he certainly claims and knows is that he's a descendant of the fifth son of God, Eri, right? And that's what he certainly does know and claims. And so you'll see, they use the Star of David a lot in the community because that's part of their the symbol that they kind of lift up to connect them to the Israelite roots. This person right here is the chief of Endemoli, right? Interesting kind of guy. So the king, all this to say is that the king, he's meant to really be a spiritual leader, right? And the practices are very embodied, very connected to the land, centered around unity and trust, right? And that this king is meant to be a spiritual leader that can bring purification to the land because they have an understanding that their actions can defile themselves and will make them unfit to live in the land, and the land will expel them. So they have these positions in the community of the chief, of the king, who are meant to be these spiritual leaders who can do these rituals to cleanse themselves and the community and the land, right? So all gatherings, which you see here on the table, is the kola nut and some chalk. So all gatherings begin with the breaking of the kola nut, which is like this. It's a nut that's used a lot throughout many different tribes of in Africa and in Nigeria. But they use it particularly around welcoming guests, and so that's its symbolism. And what I was told is that it's not about the kola nut, but anything could be used. It's just about welcoming you, right? So if you go there and they don't give you the kola nut or they don't give you something else that's like parallel to the kola nut, you're not really being welcomed. You're kind of
Wow.
so you have to know this, right? They do pouring of libations to the creator in the name of the ancestors, right? And so that's how all gatherings start, right? You don't, and it's a way to really say everything that's said here is said in truth, and there's no deception going on here. So it's a way to really build unity and trust. Just a couple more things before we open up for any further discussion or questions. That some of the key customs that really, beyond the lineage piece, some of the key customs that really connect it all together is, you have many African people who practice circumcision, right? But you don't have many people or that practice specifically circumcision on the 8th day. And to this day, all Igbo people, all Igbo men are circumcised on the 8th day. And that's a very important piece. You have the rituals. I mean, it doesn't jive with our modern sensibility, but you have the rituals around a woman's monthly menstruation, seclusion of the women after childbirth, right? They do have some kind of Shabbat practice. It's, according to their market days, right? So it doesn't map onto the 7th day exactly, but they do have a Shabbat, if you will. They have really interesting, similar funeral rituals around that Jews, European Jews and Jews today, and Ethiopian Jews practice as well. And there's some interesting linguistic connections as well, right? There's a scholar, Remy Alona. He's an Igbo man. He's here in the US right now. He's getting his doctorate. He's written many books. What he's arguing is that the word Hebrew and the language of Hebrew in Hebrew is the word for it is Ivri, right? So you have Ivri, you got Hebrew, and you have Igbo. And he's actually saying that those are all the same word, just variations as it evolved into different languages, right? So for example, he brings that in Middle English, that the way that they would speak about Hebrew, they spelled it like this, Hebrew. I put it in the chat. Now, there was a time when Igbo was spelled Hebo, Heebo. Then it went to Igbo. Then it went to Igbo, right? G is silent, Igbo. So he's really arguing is that they're all the same word, Ivri, Hebrew, Igbo. If you even hear it yourself, I mean, that it's all really the same word, and that's one key evidence. Another interesting connection, a linguistic connection, and there's some scholarship really being invested, some doctoral studies. I'm not a linguist by the way, but this is some of the learning that I learned this from this Professor Duru. I visited the University of Lagos and I got a 2-hour interview with him. And so he was explaining, for example, some linguistic connections. There's the word for going up, leah, in Igbo, and then in Hebrew, the word for going up is aliyah. So you can see that there are some, the languages started here and diverged over time, right? And so you still see, though, some connections to the language. Yeah, the very, we went over the king. And again, if you just look on the map, you'll find all sorts of towns named after Eri, right? Because they're trying to lift up their ancestor. And the tribe of God isn't the only tribe there, but it's one of the main leading tribes. And the last thing is that I'll just note is the Obadiah Alliance. This is a rabbinic Beit Din, a rabbinic kind of council of ruling, if you will. And in 2022, this rabbinic Beit Din reviewed the history, the linguistics, the culture of Igbo people, and they made their official ruling that Igbo people are, without a doubt, ancestral, or without a doubt, are, my brain is slowing down here. The descendants, thank you, the descendants of Israelites, and that many went through forced conversion, and so should be considered the status of Anusim, which are people who have gone through forced conversion, and so their conversion shouldn't be held against them because it wasn't, maybe in some cases it was voluntary, but in many other cases it would have been through force. And so they recognize Igbo people as Jews. Now, the state of Israel refuses to recognize Igbo people as Jews. And I think that's largely because, by anybody's, it's not it doesn't take any kind of real analysis to know that racism, right? That, you would potentially have 34 to 50 million people who could then claim the right of return to Israel. And that would change the power dynamics in Israel drastically overnight. So they refuse to recognize the Igbo people as Jews, but you have many Israelis who have gone to Israel themselves and have come away with the same understanding that there's
On the Igbo land themselves.
Igbo land, sorry, coming away with the same understanding that without a shadow of doubt, that Igbo people are descendants of Israelites and they know who they are. And it's just really that Europeans are holding the keys and refuse to open up their hearts and create the space for everybody to have the same access that other Jews enjoy. But you're already seeing some affirmation from some rabbinical authorities. So again, I share all this just to, try to connect and deepen our own connections to our own family's lineage. And all this to say is that I'm trying to put together a delegation to go in January of next year. And, for folks who are interested and want to come and be a part, you're welcome, of course. And, there's nothing like being there yourself. You can hear it from me, but to be there yourself is a completely different kind of experience and journey. So just want to open it up. Any comments, questions, other insights, pushbacks, anything that folks want to add?
This was great, Yehudah. Thank you. A lot of information. Yeah, I hope to visit one day, But you know what I was thinking, when you were going through the slides, I was wondering, what is their economy over there? Like how do they live? Are they autonomous? Do they grow their own food and have their water source and whatnot?
Yeah, so they're all it's all a part of, Igbo land is all part of Nigerian government, right? So economy is now connected to the Nigerian government. Right now I think that there's an ongoing strike that's happening. So they strike, nobody works. I think every Monday, nobody works or nobody's supposed to work, but that strike's been going on for like 3 years. So some people
3-year strike.
Yeah, so some people do work on Mondays because there's like but yeah.
What's their gross national product? What is their main driver?
Well, they got
or
oil.
Do you know? I mean, we could look it up. I'm just
They
curious.
got oil.
Oh.
But is that where they're making the majority of their money?
Yeah,
for the
oil
economy?
is their biggest thing, right? Couture could speak to it. I don't know. I see she might still be here, but Couture, can you address that question since you?
She might be sleeping and her phone just on.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe
I
she.
am still here. Yes, Nigeria is Africa's, I think, one of Africa's largest producers of oil and exporters.
That's
Okay.
interesting. So
And has been since the late 60s.
Wow. So do they export to the US or is it other countries?
The US mostly, and other countries as well.
Wow. I didn't know that. Because all you hear about
The other thing I was
just going to ask Couture to explain that her PhD research was all about that oil industry. I mean, maybe just take a minute and explain that, Couture.
on mute.
I'm sorry, what do you want me to explain?
Your PhD research with the oil industry.
So my research isn't focused on like the oil industry itself. It's focused on corporations in the oil industry and how they're contributing to education development in Nigeria. And so it looks at the history of Nigeria's reliance on the oil sector and it's resulting lack of investment in other social and public goods. So their lack of investment in education as a result of their over-reliance on oil rents.
Right.
Wow.
So who actually controls the oil over there? Like who's really pulling the strings?
Katora?
On mute.
So unfortunately, as is common, where the oil is located, which is like the Delta region of the country, the local communities there don't actually have control over their natural resources. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a few powerful families who really control the oil industry. And unfortunately, historically, international oil companies have exploited the, natural resources in Nigeria for many, many years.
The big companies are what? Exxon and who else?
Chevron, Shell, ExxonMobil. What did you say? Oh, and Total is a French company. But I would say that recently there's been like divestment from Nigeria's for relying on like onshore oil production. So a lot of the international oil companies have moved offshore because it's really, really hard to do business in Nigeria. It's just not. A lot of these companies have moved their interests to other countries. For example, the company that I'm focusing on, ExxonMobil, a lot of their focus right now is in Guyana and on newer sites and investments. But they still have a large presence in Nigeria, and they're doing a lot of offshore production.
Wow. Interesting.
Very interesting. Just go back to somebody's question about, Nigeria is huge, right? And so you have the in Igbo land itself, Igbo land, as you saw in the videos, is very rural. So in Igbo land, I think the economy is based, I imagine there's a lot of farming. And so you have you still have the different market days, and the markets kind of rotate in different areas and that.
How do they feel where you were about Black Americans? Do they feel any kind of kinship or anything, I mean, I feel like our image is probably corrupted when you go to other countries, as far as like Black Americans and what they might think of us generally speaking, right?
That
control the media, so
that is very true. I think, that was a challenging bit for me, to be honest. I think that the king as a Chukwumeka, he comes to Atlanta, actually. He's been coming to Atlanta for the last couple of years, connecting with African Americans who do DNA tests and have connection and recognize that they're Igbo ancestry, right? So he's been kind of like connecting with folks, and so he's like, and people have been coming to him, like, I'm not by any means, like what's it called, leading the way in that regard, right? But they're kind of used to it. It's part of his politic a little bit. You have to pay to see him, kind of thing, all that. So he's like, he's about it. Some of the elders of the community, honestly, one elder called me white.
wow.
Because in their mind, if you're American, you're white, And so that was challenging. I think it speaks to what W.B. Du Bois spoke of, the double consciousness, or what Ibram X. Kendi speaks of, the dueling consciousness, that to be a Black person in America, you're in this dual tension of, are you American
Mm.
A lot of what it means to be American is synonymous with what's become whiteness, right? Or are you, African and Black, right? So, he just because this elder, he's old, he didn't, kind of. So he said, I mean, they were speaking in Igbo. I didn't know what he said at first, right? So said it, and everybody said, no, 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 no. I said, what happened? He's like, oh, he called you white. They're like, no, 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 he's Igbo,
That's amazing, though.
you know.
But
That
it's
kind of,
nice to know that the people around you had your back.
it is, but that did have me a little fucked up. I'm not gonna lie.
I know, because I mean, because it's such a visual thing over here. You know what I mean? It's like they don't hear, and that's what I think people from people that we just call, because it's visual racism. When they come from like Dominican Republic or whatever, and they're dark as we are, they don't think they're Black. They don't consider themselves Black, but we know what racism is here. So as soon as you land here, it's all about what you look like, you know.
Well,
Yeah.
in Black, I still believe Black means different things being in America. There's African American, there's Caribbean African American, there's, descendant of slavery American, there's, it just depends.
Yeah, I'll just share this too, that, I've been to several countries at this point and in Africa, and so far I've never felt unwelcome. I've always, no matter where I've been, I felt very welcome. And even in Nigeria, I was made to feel very welcome by the people that I met. I think you saw the pictures when I went to the art museum, right? The lady embraced us, took pictures with us, the owner of this museum, who's been featured in the New York Times, who's been all around the world. She didn't have to do that.
Right.
And, I was told like, oh, wow, she did that with you. Like you really found favor. So I just feel like, we don't need to fear that. I feel like, it's open to us, right? It's definitely open. If we go, we're going to be made welcome. And now that we have growing connections, right? Like I'll just share this too, that, in my mind, it's the creator that has been creating these connections, right? Like I stumbled onto Yitzhak's mother, which her name is Liz Ben, through, a different type of connection. And that's how Yehudah was able to actually meet up with them and go where he went. Because if it wasn't for this sort of just stumbling onto a connection with her and then somebody giving me books and saying, you have a place to send these books. And I was like, oh, I just met this lady. And I found another Nigerian who lives in New Jersey who knew how I could ship the books. And I shipped the books during the pandemic. And here it is years later now, this is a family that we're very connected to now. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a way being paved for us. And I wanted Yehudah to have this call because it's open to all of us. We're family, right? And, if we go in January, I'm hoping you guys can go, man. I don't want you to feel in any way fearful. Like
I'm not fearful at all. I actually think we are where I've learned because I work with so many immigrant African American, immigrant Americans, Black Americans, wherever they're from. And they don't have any of these issues of the racial Black tension that you mentioned or whatever coming here. They learn it here. And they all describe that if we go there, whoever we are, we're just embraced. They don't understand the distinctions at all unless they're exposed to American culture.
The American madness.
But sadly, it is what it is here. It's what we've been raised in.
Yeah.
Totally. And yeah, I didn't share that story to incite to indicate.
Oh no, it was a question, that I used. So I just.
But I just think it goes to show that it's more less of a racial thing. It's just more of an association of what it means to be an American. Is why they said that, right? That if in his mind, American is white, right? Like those two things are synonymous. So when he called me,
so deep. I had heard.
Well, it's a cultural thing, which I hate the term racism. I don't even like using race so much as ethnicity and culture.
Yeah.
I hate that we still propagate this race concept. because it's created and false.
Yeah. When are you going in January?
I'm sorry?
No, I was asking Wes, when are y'all going in Jan? You're talking about January 2025?
Yehudah's putting that date out there. I'm not sure how firm January is as opposed to January, February. I don't know. Yehudah has been saying January for a few times, and I don't know, Yehudah, why January? Could it be February, or is that firm?
What's the travel like also?
Recording in progress.
Uh-oh. I think we lost.
Okay, somehow we lost Yehudah. Don't know what
I
happened.
think he's gonna come in.
Yeah, I think my internet cut out, so I'm on my phone now.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry, I missed your comment, Aunt Maria.
Oh, what did I say?
You were.
I don't know. I said my piece about like America being synonymous with whiteness, and then I lost it, but it's okay.
Oh, I just was saying I hate using the racial terms. I'm not one that I feel like there needs to be a movement to stop using the created racial terms of white and black and at meaning the visual. I'm more of a believer of ethnicity and culture.
Yeah.
I just don't, I'm not, it's imposed on me, so I end up having to respond. But I don't believe in utilizing these concepts of race. I just don't buy it. I don't believe that it's created, it's not real.
And then I asked about the travel in January and what is the travel like? What is traveling over there like? The flight, like what is it, is it a straight through flight?
Yeah, you
Only-
know, it is a flight to. They don't make it easy. I'll say that.
It's a flight to
The visa process is pretty like ridiculously long, and I ended up having to get a backdoor visa thanks to Katora. We almost didn't get to go, but Katora was very connected, so she helped to make that happen.
Do
But
you
you
need
gotta get your
vaccination shots? Do they still have yellow fever and things of that nature?
yeah, you technically need it, but they don't check it. I mean, they didn't check it for
Well, I
me.
mean, for our safety, above all.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right? Y'all got shots when
Yeah. You should have your yellow fever. But if you had it, I guess before, I think it lasts, right? So yeah, you need your yellow card. Gotta get your visa. Flights are about 1,300, I think, on average to get over there. But I'm gonna try to secure some funding to subsidize it. And then once you're in Lagos, then you take another domestic flight to Igbo land itself. And that flight's, relatively cheap. You're looking at like $130, $150, or, to $300 round trip. And then you're there, and there's a hotel that's very close to the community that we're connected to. I will say, like, just as you'll see this if you end up preparing, and Kator can speak to this a little bit, but technically, like, the US says, like, has a travel advisory of going to Igbo land, right? Of like, don't go there, but truly it was not, we never felt unsafe. There wasn't really any concern. I think it's, if you're there with an official convoy of the US or the US embassy, then you're not really welcome. But if you're just there as a person, it's totally fine.
I saw a travel advisory even for Jamaica. So
Okay. Exactly.
It's interesting.
Any other curiosities?
I can't think of anything else, but there was a good presentation.
Thank y'all. I
Yeah,
appreciate y'all joining and getting to share, and
it'd be
reach
nice to
out.
tie in the link like you showed with the Lear Stevens. We always digging for that Webster side. You know what I mean? It's like we got so much more information on the Sewell side, but not as
Right,
much back.
right,
But
right.
the Webster side, that's the hardest dig.
Right.
I'm gonna look through that link you shared with the transatlantic, the slave ship. 'Cause I've never had that connection.
That resource is wild. I mean,
I'm
you can
not gonna
spend.
even look at it tonight because once oh my God, I end up being stuck for hours. So I'm not even turning it. I'm just gonna pin it.
Yeah. Let me know what you find on Cindy.
All right.
Every few weeks I open it up again, and you're right. You
Yeah, it
don't
takes you
spend
down
less
a
than.
whole, right. You end up weaving a web and you go down a rabbit hole, and next thing you
Yeah.
know, it's 11 o'clock at night and you've been sitting there for 4 hours, and I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, so but I am definitely gonna use that. I can't wait to
Yeah.
Well, you guys are just like detectives trying to trace down all
Right.
this history and information of all the lineage we have. It's very involved.
Yeah.
It's good though, 'cause especially like Moria said, our kids and stuff probably gonna be looking for some of this information. So it's good that you recorded this and put this together.
I hope it will be useful for them. You know what I mean? You never know. This might be useful information because they may need to know some lineage to make connections, like you were saying, Wes. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like the connection that you made.
Mhm.
We should
Exactly.
be so anchored that we can't reach back to some other country outside of the US, really, in my opinion, especially now. You know?
Okay. 100%. You don't know what's about to happen. Shoot.
Or don't. Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm.
Cool.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks
Well,
everybody.
Thanks for the presentation.
All right.
This is great.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Nice
Thanks,
seeing all of
everybody.
you guys.
Seeing
Everybody.
Nice seeing
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. So
Yep,
good to get
yep.
together.
And looking forward to seeing Katora when she comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
forward to
Yeah.
everyone.
You guys got me on Zoom twice now.
All right.
Leroy and Wesley even looking alike. You know what I thought about when Leroy and Aaron meant when we walked into Calvary that time years ago, and that lady walked up and said, "Hi, Leroy." Aaron just turned
Talking about what?
around. He said, "Hello."
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, all right, you
All
guys.
right.
All right.
I'll talk to y'all. I'll see y'all
Love to
later.
all.
I'm checking out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Nice to see
All
you.
right.
Shalom.
Bye, y'all.
All right.